Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight, I am going to be reacting to Stalin's 5-year plan for economic mass murder between two wars, 1932, part 1 of 4 by Time Ghost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions to other Time Ghost History between two wars videos, remember the playlist card will be at the top. If you want to check out the original video as well as Time Ghost History's YouTube channel, remember the links are in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
So what do you do when you've ostensibly created the dictatorship of the proletariat, but you hardly have any proletarians? You build factories, lots of them, because where there are factories, there are workers. But if most of the peasants become workers, who will provide the workers with bread? And now that we've abolished commerce, what will the workers do with their wages? These are some of the questions facing Joseph Stalin in 1932 as his first 5-year plan for state-controlled industrialization goes into its chaotic last year. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. As the 20s progress, the USSR comes under increasing pressure from within to evolve. The country faces constant food shortages, despite that the former lands of the Russian Tsar are mainly agricultural. Industry is underdeveloped and infrastructure is far behind the Western world. Stalin and the rest of the Soviet Central Committee also perceive themselves to be under imminent threat from both within and abroad, so they want more military power.
People are starving and you're thinking about military power? You know, when you're out of touch with reality, this is what tends to happen.
During the years of the Civil War and the ensuing wars, this had been solved with what became known as war communism, pretty much a euphemism for systematic plunder and robbery through war spoils, expropriation, and forced requisitioning of agricultural produce. Coupled with the abolition of free commerce and trade, already by 1921, this is having disastrous effects on the economy, with widespread starvation and unemployment crippling Bolshevik Russia and its dominions. Vladimir Lenin, then leader of the Soviet, sees no other way out than to implement his new economic policy, the NEP. It's an attempt to solve the immediate economic problems by reintroducing elements of free market economics, like profit-seeking and private trade. Yet several features, including banking and large industries, remain under state control. It solves the immediate pain somewhat. Most significantly, it leads to less starvation, but doesn't create much progress, especially not in manufacturing and infrastructure. See, the central problem for what has now become the USSR is that going back to the old ways won't solve that it's still, in large part, stuck in a pre-industrialized economic structure, which is perhaps paradoxical for a country that has now gone through a revolution meant to liberate the industrial working class masses. In reality, this means that it is everything but well-suited for Karl Marx's predicted workers' revolution that he foresaw in the industrialized countries of Western Europe, not the agrarian East. Marx posited that the establishment of socialism would come organically as a result of a majority working class in an industrialized society, creating social change from the grassroots.
But the leaders of Bolshevik Russia, literally cut that out. they imagined that part out of existence and they just continued on with what's ever left. And they claimed it as their own ideas, as their own panacea of what the future of a nation should be like. And now they're in this mess and they can't seem to get out of it. You see, when you lose touch of reality, when you think you have all the answers to your own the problems that you've created, it's insane.
It's the belief that once freed of its shackles, and once class has been abolished by revolution, the proletariat will magically rule itself in a blissful dictatorship of the proletariat. But in the Soviet Union of the 1920s, if you feel that this Marxist vision is even possible and a must, such industrialization will have to be carried out to create this working class. And until then, the application of state power will need to be top-down. Obviously, it's quite a bit more complicated than that, but vastly simplified. Although the Bolsheviks claim a revolution in the name of the proletariat and the peasants, their relationship to the peasant class is at best ambivalent and at times downright murderous, as we shall see here and in a later episode. Anyway, when Lenin dies in 1924, the other communist leaders spend a few years infighting about who's going to be the new boss, instead of addressing this elephant in the room. It is mainly Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky who vie for power. Long story short, in 1928, Stalin emerges victorious as he expels Trotsky from the party and forces him into exile. Okay, Stalin now feels an urgent need to take the Russian-dominated Soviet Union forward at any price. He feels that the USSR is under imminent threat of either falling apart or being dissembled from external forces. Or as he will ask rhetorically in 1931, do you want our socialist fatherland to be beaten and to lose its independence? If you do not want this, you must put an end to its backwardness in the shortest possible time. With fresh memories of the First World War, the Russian Civil War, the attempts at independence of the former western lands of the Russian Empire that resulted in millions of deaths, military needs are seen as fundamental. Beginning in 1926,
fundamental, overriding the hunger and the economic degradation of your nation. Military power is more important. Yeah.
The Soviet government undergoes a war scare that intensifies in 1927. While an imminent threat does not necessarily exist, the fear is not baseless. Just in January 1927, senior figures such as the editor-in-chief of Pravda, Nikolai Bukharin, chairman of the Council of People's Commissars of the Soviet Union, Alexei Rykov, and People's Commissar for Defense of the Soviet Union, Klement Voroshilov, all warn of the imminence of war. In the East, they fear that Japan, or even the US, might renew activities on the Russian Western Pacific Rim that ended after the Civil War. They worry that Great Britain, who had also been involved in the Civil War, might encourage encroachment eastward by Poland. This worry is made particularly strong by Poland's policy of Prometheanism, a program by Joseph Pilsudski, who is now dictator of Poland, to weaken the Soviet Union by supporting nationalist and separatist movements. To counter this, they need more arms, but they can no longer rely on war communism. There simply is not enough left to plunder. And despite a secret military exchange between the Red Army and the German Reichswehr starting already in 1921, they have few international allies that will support them. They can and do purchase arms from abroad, but lack the cash or credit worthiness needed to do so at scale.
Abroad from who exactly? Who are they acquiring these weapons from? Who is supporting them and their quest for militarization of their entire country? Who is supporting that?
Not to mention that it makes them dependent on foreign relations. Faced with all these urgencies, Stalin, with his deep-seated hatred of capitalism, sees only one way out: a strict military-style plan for rapid, state-controlled industrialization. And rapid is an understatement. In the same speech as earlier in 1931, he says, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it or we go under." So, as much as 10 times faster than the West developed. His instrument for that will be his 5-year plans, with goals set not on realism and opportunity, but on ideology and necessity. Rather than permitting the market to determine cost, production, and consumption, the 5-year plan is dictated by the government. Quotas are established for various products with the goal of increasing production significantly, all while the Soviet economy has barely recovered to its 1914 levels by 1928. It will be a brutal plan, built knowingly on the suffering, starvation, and death of millions of Soviet citizens. In fact, the targets are more than ambitious, they are simply unrealistic. The most dramatic effect on the people will come out of how they plan to feed the masses executing their plan. We'll cover that in a separate episode in detail, but for now, it's enough to say that the agrarian part of the plan has two parts: forced collectivization of all farms and the liquidation of the kulaks as a class, with the latter turning into downright mass murder. It is, in short, a catastrophic failure. Between 1928 and 1933, agricultural output diminishes by 18.5%, with livestock products falling by a stunning 56%. Not only does this create food shortages, even starvation, it has serious knock-on effects. For instance, the sudden drop in cattle, which were needed for draft power to plow the fields, results in a rise in the number of tractors needed. But instead of adjusting the plan, they simply raise the quota of new tractors. Decline in food production leads to the implementation of rationing in peacetime, decreasing productivity of the hungering workers. When they can't fulfill the quotas, they're just moved to the next deadline. Other materials, such as various metals, have to be imported.
This is like a domino effect, you know? One catastrophe leads to another catastrophe, and it just builds up and up and up and up. I'm actually quite surprised that, you know, the very same people who were, up against the Tsarist regime, you know, and the royal family, toppling over the royal family, were not on the streets yet again to topple this government that has brought them to their knees and that has led them to starvation and economic ruin. You know, I'm quite surprised. Maybe they are still in that dream world of enjoying this communist ideals and this Russia, this whole new Soviet Union created. Maybe they're still in love with that idealism of it. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm just surprised that no one is rebelling from this kind of situation.
Finance that, they export food products like grain that are already not sufficient to feed the population. And even for an isolated economy like the USSR, starting in October 1929, the global depression further exacerbates import and export issues. But the plan still does not change. As Stalin tightens his dictatorial grip and his goals are not met, he uses radicalization to try to force the goals through. More cautious engineers are denounced as undermining the Soviet Union's advancement and labeled bourgeois saboteurs. The plan becomes more and more divorced from the reality on the ground. And yet, in 1931, Stalin confidently claims, "There are no fortresses Bolsheviks cannot capture." Economic planners with more limited visions are marginalized, while ideologues are promoted in their place in an increasingly out-of-control system. But, as the economic historian Eugene Zaleski notes, the goals may have been largely immaterial. Stalin was a man of action, and
I'm sorry, Indian Idol. So, honestly, this government has been hiring loudmouths, you know, people who can talk, but who have no qualifications. Basically, they've been hiring politicians to do the jobs of economists, the jobs of accountants, engineers, farmers, and all of these critical skills. They're being replaced by people who just know how to talk and who know how to galvanize people to do something. You know, like a politician, essentially a politician. Yikes.
Industrialization meant for him the intensified construction of factories, the development of new branches of industry and new regions, the improvement of labor skills, and the reduction of economic dependence on the outside world. His vision of industrial development was of a vast program of large works, but works carried out under the impetus of a drive imbued with ideological fanaticism. Under these conditions, what would it matter whether these immense works were completed in 3, 4, or 10 years? But the optimism that took hold of the planners had some justification. Following the end of the Russian Civil War, the Soviet economy, and the industrial sector in particular, saw a high growth rate. Experience in the First World War also contributed to the belief that resources were underutilized. For example, the Russian Empire had greater economic output in 1916 then in 1913, despite the effects of the war, including territorial losses. And as mentioned earlier, the ongoing war scare helped produce an existential fear in which rapid industrialization was less of a choice, but more of an urgent and unavoidable necessity. And believe it or not, in terms of industrial output, although it doesn't meet Stalin's insane goals, it is undoubtedly effective. Industrial output skyrockets, taking the Soviet Union from being the fifth nation in absolute terms of industrial capacity in 1928 to being number 2 by 1932, trailing only the United States.
But at what cost? At what cost? So many people have to die for this industrialization, for this militarization of the entire economy of Bolshevik Russia, of the USSR. You know, I mean, they could have tried to find some sort of balance where they would have their development, but also able to sustain the lives of those who live in rural areas, those who live in the farming or who work in the farming sector. You know, so that they're able to sustain themselves and they're also able to produce food for the rest of the country. You know, I think that should have been one of the very first things that they should have tried to deal with first before thinking about creating all of these industries and the industrialization and the militarization of the economy. You know, you have to focus on making sure that your people are fed so that you prevent any potential uprisings. But it seems like in Russia, it just didn't happen that way, you know. No one was uprising, maybe because they were also so hungry, they didn't have the energy to fight. You know, they just... it's just terrible.
Not only that, many of the goals are achieved ahead of time. With the statistics on the first 2 years in hand, Stalin proclaims that the plan could be achieved in 4 years, partially due to what he calls the enthusiasm of the workers. This is embodied in posters that read 2 + 2 = 5.
Are they serious? Oh gosh.
Isn't a transformation that just focuses on putting out product. Prior to the 5-year plan, the Soviet Union lacks even the basic industries, which are needed for industrial development in the first place. So they depend on tools and machinery from abroad. Or, as the Soviet foreign trade theoretician D.D. Mishustin will note in 1938, the country's development depended on capitalist technology, and that...
Isn't that just a beautiful irony right there? You know, the very government that supposedly despises and hates capitalism and capitalist society, they are the ones now, you know, getting that technology from those capitalist societies, getting that knowledge from those capitalist societies, and they're trying to build up their industries. And then the moment they think they can stand on their own 2 feet, then they cut off the rest of the world and say that, you see, Russia is now powerful. We have grown into this powerful nation, and we are ahead of these capitalist nations. When in actual fact, it was because of those capitalist nations that your nation is where it is today, you know? And actually that kind of reminds me of what happened with China as well. You know, China wasn't always this powerful second world's powerful economy, you know, on the planet. Before it became that, you know, they had to focus on getting investment from the rest of the world, mainly from the Western powers. They needed to get that investment for building factories, for building institutions, and developing their science and technology. And once they had reached a certain level, then they started cutting off the rest of the world, and now they say, China, this is China. Everything that we have done here is by our own 2 hands. Everything that we have accomplished is by our own ingenuity. And you forget, or they try to make the people forget that, you know, this was mainly a global investment in your country. You know? Hey, politicians.
Equipment of the very latest design and construction was required in order to free the country from the need of importing this machinery and equipment once the goal had been reached. But now in 1932, the Soviets are still in desperate need of Western machinery, so they continue exporting their badly needed goods, like grain, while the population starves. And it isn't just food that is scarce. Living standards overall suffer considerably. While urban housing increases by 12%, that does not keep up with the massive urban population growth. And this is a slap in the face for the workers, who now go into newly built modern factories, only to return home to pre-war housing units without any kind of sanitation.
And that's why I'm still surprised. How is it possible that the people just took this? They just allowed this. They just accepted that this is their lives now, where they have to work in these factories but then come back home to nothing. How is this any better than how you guys were living under the Tsar? How is this any better? How has anything really changed for you on the ground? You know? I see changing for the politicians. I see changing for those who are politically connected. But for the rest, what's going to happen?
Healthcare can't keep up with urbanization and so on. But even if all that is solved, it's not enough to just keep people alive to keep them productive. The Bolsheviks now have to train largely uneducated peasants into skilled machine operators. It turns out to be a massive challenge, but they do manage to increase the skilled workforce to some degree with systematic training and new incentive structure. Skilled workers are given better housing and higher food rations. In October 1931, their wages increase on average by 30%. And for some, in say the coal and metal industries, wages increase by 100%. But what good are wage increases if one cannot spend money? Prior to the first five-year plan, mass consumer goods were largely absent in the Soviet Union. The population instead relied on handcrafted products. But the kurstani, handcraft workers, are essentially wiped out as a category in 1928 with the forced elimination of private industry. In 1931 and 1932, when it becomes clear that paying people when there is nothing to buy doesn't make much sense, the kurstani are permitted to resume their old trades.
You see what happens when you replace very important economical institutions with politicians, with loud mouths, with these people who just have ideas but have no qualification in what they're talking about. This is what happens. And only now, when the catastrophe has occurred, do they realize that, oh, we made a mistake. Actually, this is not how it's supposed to be done. Then they try to revert back. Oy.
In parallel, state-owned and run stores open that provide the slowly increasing output of consumer goods and the scarce food products. Well, in the countryside, food is not only scarce, it's hardly available at all, especially between the summer of 32 and the spring of 33. See, by then, to feed the growing proletariat, the Bolsheviks are simply going into the countryside and taking the already meager food away from the peasants, even literally stealing it off their kitchen tables. In this year, 1932, into mid-1933, farmers and their families will die in droves, especially in Ukraine. They will starve to the point that many will simply drop dead as they walk. Men, women, children, families, whole villages will succumb to what can only be described as a genocide by hunger. We will cover this in another episode. All in all, at least 4.5 million people, perhaps many more, will pay with their lives for Stalin's progress program. They die for a program of industrialization that will play an essential role in events causing even more deaths of Soviet citizens in only 8 years. But it will also have another essential effect on World War II. In fact, a decisive role. The Kremlin's effort at spreading out industry throughout the country, not just in the Western European portions of the country, results in massive industrialization past the Ural Mountains and into Central Asia. Great sprawling factories in the heartland of Russia where an invading army will have great difficulty to reach them. Factories that might now be producing tractors can easily be transformed into making guns, ammunition, planes, and tanks. Overall, it's a transformation on a scale that is hardly imaginable. One day, it will amaze Adolf Hitler, who, in the only surviving recording of a private conversation by the Fuhrer, will express his utter shock to Finnish Field Marshal Mannerheim that in a single Soviet tank factory, there are 60,000 workers. And that is only one factory. Across the Soviet Union, there will be millions and millions of workers producing an endless output of the tools of death with tools carved from the dead. To understand how Stalin came to power in the first place, you can watch our Between Two Wars episode about that by clicking right here. Our patron of the week is Nicholas Arblaster. Thanks to Nicholas and his cool last name and the Time Ghost Army, we can make more videos just like that. Do not forget to subscribe. And hey, we got 5 years. My brain hurts a lot. 5 years. That's all we've got.
Okay guys, that was Stalin's 5-year plan for economic mass murder between two wars, 1932, part 1 of 4 by Time Ghost History. Yeah, you know, after listening to this episode, I'm just, you know, thinking about what's happening also, particularly on the African continent, well, mainly also like in my country in particular, you know, where in some certain departments where you would expect someone with experience, someone who knows their portfolio, someone who has the qualifications in the particular field, is not the person who's heading the department. It's a political deployee who's heading the department, and that political deployee will be talking platitudes of words, talking about various things that have got nothing to do with their respective department, and it leads to catastrophe. It leads to further corruption and nepotism and incompetency, you know. And you just ask yourself, why are these people here? What is your purpose to be a minister of such an important portfolio? You know, when you hire people who don't know anything about such critical places of economic development, of social cohesion and development, when you hire people who just know how to talk, it just breeds catastrophe. You know, a domino effect is created because of one ministry that has been mismanaged and mishandled. It compounds and it affects the other ministries as well, because, you know, this entire system requires leadership that is responsible, that is capable, that is understanding of their purpose in that respective ministries, you know. And if you don't have that system where people know what they are there to do, you know, then it creates a serious problem. And I think that's what happened in Russia during the 1930s, you know, where Stalin wanted his dreams to become a reality, and he didn't like hearing, you know, the truth or evidence from those who have actually studied, those who actually have the qualifications, telling him it simply cannot be done the way you want it, because if you push for it this way, there will be heavy costs, there will be people dying on the street from hunger, you know. He didn't want to hear any of that. He wanted to hear, yes sir, can I do anything more for you, sir? And that's what he got. He got his yes men, he got his political heavyweights, you know, working in the government and pushing forward these ideals and these ideas and these missions and plans that Stalin had at the detriment of the people, you know, leading his people to starvation and hunger and just utter destruction of society. That's why I'm still quite surprised that so many not so many, but the people of the USSR continued to be led by this government, you know, that has left so many people dead. So I'm asking myself, how is it possible that they had all of this might, all of this strength to overthrow the Tsar government and the monarchy, I should say, but not have the same kind of strength to take down the government of Stalin, you know, the regime? How is it possible? Guys, it's confusing. It's really confusing. I guess that's it for tonight. If you like the video, remember to give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Time Goes to History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. And I guess I'll see you next week Tuesday. Okay? Bye-bye.